There are hands you remember for life, not because they were elegant or smooth, but because they carried stories in every line, in every scar, in every gesture. My great-grandmother's hands are those for me. I could recognize them anywhere. The way her fingers curved slightly from years of work, the skin browned by sun and soap, the nails always kept short and clean. They weren't the kind of hands you see in magazines. They were the kind of hands that held families together. When I was a child, those hands seemed like the most capable things in the world. They could turn flour and water into bread that rose tall and golden, filling the entire house with the smell of comfort. They could mend torn clothes so precisely that the thread disappeared into the fabric, leaving nothing but strength where there had once been weakness. They could braid ropes from stray bits of twine, or pick herbs from the garden with quick, certain movements. I watched in awe as her fingers cracked walnuts with a single snap, peeled apples into long, curling ribbons, stitched hems in near silence. It felt like magic then, though I know now it was only skill, the kind of skill born from repetition, patience, necessity. And always they carried scents. I remember the smell of yeast lingering on her palms after she set dough to rise, the sharp trace of lavender from the sachets she tucked into dresser drawers, the earthy scent of dill and parsley when she returned from the garden. On winter mornings, after she lit the stove, her hands carried the clean tang of soak, rubbed in so firmly her skin grew dry and cracked. Sometimes, when she tucked a blanket around me, her fingertips smelled faintly of smoke from the wood fire. For years afterward, whenever I caught that smell anywhere, I felt safe. She was my mother's grandmother, but to me, she was simply Baba. Eternal, immovable, carved from something stronger than time. Her back stayed straight even as the years pressed against her shoulders. Her eyes never lost their sharpness. And though her voice was not always gentle, sometimes sharp when I was careless, when I tracked mud through her kitchen, when I tugged too hard at her apron while she worked, beneath it I always sensed the softness, the love that lived deeper than scolding, the tenderness hidden behind firm words. She might chide me, but moments later, she would slip the largest piece of bread into my hands, or let me sip from her teacup when she thought no one was watching. What I remember most is how rarely her hands were still. Even when her legs were tired, even when her back needed rest, her fingers kept moving, stitching buttons, shelling peas, peeling potatoes, braiding long strands of her own silver hair before tucking it beneath a scarf. They were hands that never wasted a second, as if stillness itself were a luxury she could not afford. And yet, for me, those hands were teachers. She didn't explain much with words. She believed you learned by watching, by trying, by failing and trying again. I can see myself now, perched beside her at the wooden table, my small hands clumsy, dropping pins or tearing the dough she had carefully rolled. She never lost patience. She would guide my fingers, firm but gentle, until they moved with something close to her rhythm. I didn't realize it then, but she was showing me more than skills. She was teaching me how to endure, how to care, how to shape life with your own effort. Sometimes late at night, I imagine her hands holding mine when I was little, mine so small they barely filled her palm, hers rough and lined but steady. I didn't understand then what those hands had lived through, what decades of work and worry had etched into them. All I knew was that when they touched me, I felt anchored, as though no storm could pull me away. Her hands shaped more than bread, more than fabric, more than gardens. They shaped us, our family, our rhythm, our sense of what mattered. And even now, when I think of her, I wonder if I will ever find that same steadiness inside myself.
When I think back to my childhood, so many of the images are tied to my great-grandmother's house, and more than that, to the lessons she gave without ever really calling them lessons. She never gathered me close and said, "Today I will teach you this." Instead, she let me hover at her side like a shadow, watching, trying, fumbling, and in that clumsy imitation, I learned more than any formal instruction could have given me. Her kitchen was my classroom. I can still see the long wooden table, scarred by years of use, the flour dusting it like snow as she rolled out dough with quick, practiced motions. I would sit on a stool too tall for me, legs swinging, eager to be included. Eventually, she'd hand me a small piece of dough to knead, knowing I would pound it with more enthusiasm than skill. My fingers would stick together, the dough tearing instead of stretching, and she'd laugh softly under her breath. Without a word, she would slide her hands over mine, guiding my little fists into smoother movements. Her touch was firm but patient, teaching me rhythm, press, fold, turn, repeat, until the dough softened under my palms. There were days in the garden, too, when the sun was high and the air was heavy with the smell of earth. She showed me how to press seeds into the soil, not too deep, not too shallow. She said, "They're like us," she once said, her voice quiet but sure. "They need space, air, and patience." At the time, I didn't grasp the weight of her words. I only loved the way the dirt cooled my hands and the way she trusted me with something so small and alive. Later, when the sprouts pushed through the soil, I felt like I had discovered a secret magic, when she had known all her life. Inside the house, she taught me smaller things that somehow felt monumental. How to thread a needle without licking it too much. How to sew on a button so tightly it would outlive the shirt itself. How to fold clothes so they wouldn't wrinkle in drawers. None of these tasks seemed important at the time, and yet, when I left her house and returned to my own, I carried them like treasures. They were proof that even my clumsy hands could create order, repair damage, give shape to something fragile. And she was strict, yes. She expected me to sit up straight, to mind my manners, to try again when I failed. If I pouted, she ignored it until I either laughed at myself or returned to the task. But even in her strictness, I never doubted her love. It was in the way she let me drink the leftover warm milk after baking, in the way she tucked an extra piece of bread into my pocket, in the way her eyes softened when she thought I wasn't looking. These small lessons stitched themselves into me. I didn't realize then that she was giving me more than skills. She was showing me a way of life, patience, steadiness, care for the little things. And though my hands never grew as certain as hers, I like to think that every time I cook or mend or plant something, I carry her rhythm inside me. Even now, grown as I am, there are moments when I catch myself tying a knot the way she did, or folding a shirt into thirds just as she showed me, and I smile. It feels like she's still there beside me, her voice in the air, her hands over mine, guiding me once more.
My great-grandmother was never the type of woman people described as gentle, at least not in the way the word is usually used. Soft, quiet, yielding. She was firm, unshakable, sometimes sharp in tone and brisk in gesture. To a stranger, she might have seemed stern, even intimidating. But to those of us who lived in the orbit of her presence, there was something deeper, a kind of love that revealed itself not in sweet words or easy indulgence, but in the way she demanded more of us and of herself. She grew up in a time when life didn't forgive laziness, when every day meant work simply to keep going. I think that shaped her more than anything. Her hands, her back, her voice, all carried that history. She rose early, even when her body must have begged her for more rest. She kept the house in perfect order, not for appearances, but because to her, order was dignity. Her garden was her pride, a patch of earth that seemed to yield more than it should, perhaps because she never asked it for less.
She bent over those rows of beans and cucumbers, tomatoes and herbs with a devotion that rivaled prayer. I remember watching her one hot afternoon as she worked in the soil, her scarf slipping back from her forehead, sweat glistening on her temples. I whined about the heat, tugging at my dress, asking if we could go inside. She glanced at me, not unkindly, but with that steady gaze that always seemed to hold more meaning than words. "Life doesn't stop because you are uncomfortable," she said simply. Then she handed me a small watering can, lighter than the bucket she carried. "Help me, and you'll see how even discomfort can turn into pride." At the time, I grumbled. Years later, I understood. Her strictness showed up in little things too. She corrected my posture when I slouched, nudging my shoulders back with her fingertips. She insisted that clothes be folded neatly, that tools be returned where they belonged, that I look people in the eyes when speaking. She had no tolerance for waste, of food, of time, of words. And yet, for all that firmness, I never mistook it for coldness. Her love was practical, steady, reliable. She didn't shower me with praise, but when she slipped an extra piece of bread into my pocket or brushed crumbs from my chin with a quick, almost hidden touch, I knew what it meant. I often heard my mother and aunts talk about her in hushed tones, half admiring, half exhausted by her standards. "She never rests," they'd say, shaking their heads. "Even now she thinks she must carry the world." But underneath those complaints was reverence. Because in truth, she had carried the world, at least our world. Without her, the routines would falter, the meals would lose their rhythm, the garden would not feed us the same way. She was the foundation none of us ever had to think about because it simply never cracked. There were moments when I tested her patience. I was a child, after all, curious and restless, easily distracted. Once I knocked over a bowl of freshly picked berries, staining the kitchen floor in purple blotches. I expected shouting, punishment, anger. But she only sighed, knelt down beside me, and placed the cloth in my hand. "Clean it, child. You made the mess. You fix it." That's how life works. She didn't scold further, didn't remind me again. I remember kneeling on that floor, scrubbing with my small hands, feeling the sting of responsibility for the first time. It wasn't cruelty, it was a gift, though I didn't know it then. Her presence shaped not only me, but our whole family. Everyone orbited her with a mix of respect and awe. Even when her voice cut sharp, no one doubted its root. She demanded work, yes, but she gave work too, never asking from others what she wasn't willing to do herself. She never once sat idle while others labored. And in that example, she taught all of us something unspoken, that love isn't only what you say, it's what you do again and again, even when you're tired, even when no one notices. Looking back, I realized she wasn't strict for the sake of being strict. She knew time was precious. She knew comfort was fleeting. She knew that to survive and to find pride in surviving, you needed discipline. She carried that truth in her posture, in her routines, in her expectations. And still her love slipped through, in the way her eyes softened when she thought no one was watching, in the small indulgences she saved for me, the last slice of cake, the ripest peach, in the way she hummed old songs under her breath while she worked, melodies that carried something tender through the air. To this day, when I catch myself straightening my back at a desk, or carefully folding laundry into neat stacks, or saving food scraps for tomorrow instead of throwing them away, I feel her. Her discipline lives in me like an echo. And though as a child I sometimes wished she'd been gentler, now I see that her strength was its own kind of gentleness, one that held our family steady when the world outside was anything but.
Time, of course, has its way with everyone, even with those who once seemed unshakable. My great-grandmother is old now, older than I can truly comprehend. She moves slowly, carefully, each step measured as though the ground might slip away if she isn't watchful. Her hands, the same ones I once thought indestructible,
tremble when she lifts a cup of tea, her fingers curling more tightly around the handle to keep it steady. The strength is still there, but it has shifted, softened, hidden beneath years that finally caught up to her. I notice the changes most in the details. The lines on her face have deepened, creasing into a map of all she has lived through. Her back, once straight as an oak, bends now in a slow bow, though I can still see the pride in her posture when she insists on rising without help. Her voice is quieter, less commanding, though it has not lost its edge when she wants to remind me she is not as fragile as I imagine. "Don't look at me like I'm broken," she says, brushing me away with a flick of her hand when I hover too close. And yet I cannot help myself. To me, she will always deserve protection, even if she never asked for it. She still sits by the same window where I remember her watching me sew, the same spot where she taught me to thread a needle, to keep my stitches neat. Now the needle lies idle on the table, her eyesight too dim, her hands too shaky. Instead, she folds her palms together, resting them quietly in her lap, sometimes tracing invisible shapes across her skin, as though her fingers cannot quite bear to be still. When I visit, I try to help in little ways, carrying in groceries, tidying up the kitchen, lifting the heavy pots she once handled without effort. And yet every time, she waves me off with that stubborn pride that has defined her all her life. "I can manage," she insists, even when it takes her twice as long. She accepts my help only when she knows I will not be argued down. And even then, I see the flicker of frustration in her eyes, the unspoken battle between who she was and who she has become. And still, when I sit beside her, I see the same woman who shaped me. Her eyes have not dulled. If anything, they shine more fiercely now, carrying the wisdom of years and the clarity of knowing what truly matters. When she smiles, it is the same soft curve that once greeted me with a slice of bread or the warmth of a blanket pulled higher. And when she cakes my hand, her skin paper thin, her grip weaker than it once was, I feel that same anchor I felt as a child. Fragile or not, she steadies me. It is strange, this reversal. Once I was the one fumbling under her guidance, her hands steadying mine as I tried to sew or cook or carry more weight than I could. Now I find myself trying to steady her, guiding her steps, watching for signs of wariness she refuses to admit. I wish I could say I'd do enough, that I am by her side as often as she was by mine. But life pulls me in too many directions, and my visits are never as frequent as I hope. Each time I leave, I carry a small ache of guilt, a whisper that says, "You should do more. You should stay longer." And yet she never complains. She asks about my work, about my friends, about the places I've been. She listens with a spark in her eyes, living through my stories, reminding me that her love has always been about giving, not asking. When I try to apologize for not coming more often, she dismisses me with a smile. She says I am fine, and somehow I believe her, because in her world, fine means strong, steady, surviving. Her body has changed, yes, but the essence of her, that fierce pride, that quiet tenderness, remains untouched. Sitting beside her now, I see both versions at once. The woman who could knead dough into miracles, and the woman whose hands now tremble against her teacup. Both are her. Both are mine to remember. And as I hold her hand in mine, I realize time may bend her back, weaken her grip, slow her steps, but it cannot take away the strength she has already passed on.
There's always a knot of guilt in me when I think about her now. I don't visit as often as I should. I don't sit with her long enough when I do come, Life pulls me in too many directions. Work, deadlines, obligations that somehow always feel urgent in the moment. And yet, when I finally make it to her door, when I see her waiting, her eyes softening at the sight of me, I realize how trivial most of those urgent things truly are. She never makes me feel guilty, not once. She doesn't sigh when I arrive later than I promised, doesn't remind me how many days have passed since the last visit. Instead, she greets me as though no time has slipped by at all. A smile, warm and steady, a question about whether I've eaten, about whether I'm taking care of myself. It's almost unbearable sometimes, that kind of generosity. To give love without measure, even when you must surely know it isn't returned in equal portion. When I sit beside her now, the guilt fades into something else. Gratitude. Because she is still here. Still herself. She tells me stories from decades ago, her memory sharp in ways that surprise me, her laughter spilling easily when she recalls some mischief from her youth. I marvel at the spark that remains in her, the way she refuses to let age steal the light from her eyes. And I think, how lucky am I to still hear her voice, to still hold her hand, to still have time. But time is tricky. It whispers reminders in the lines of her face, in the tremor of her hands, in the pauses that come when she rises from her chair. I catch myself staring at her sometimes, memorizing details I've already memorized 100 times. The curve of her knuckles, the way her scarf slips back just a little, the faint hum she makes when she is lost in thought. I hoard these details as though they could outlast the inevitable. I wish I could give back even half of what she gave me. All the hours she spent teaching, guiding, feeding, shaping me, and I, in return, only show up with groceries, or sweep her kitchen, or remind her to rest. It feels like nothing compared to the magnitude of her love. Yet she takes it all as if it were enough. She thanks me for carrying heavy bags, for fixing the curtain rod, for brewing her tea. She thanks me when in truth it is I who should thank her 1,000 times over. There is something humbling about that, to realize that love is not measured by grand gestures, but by presence. Even if my visits are shorter than I want, even if I come less often than I should, what matters most is that when I am with her, I am truly with her. And in those moments, guilt melts away, replaced by the quiet certainty that she knows. She knows my love is steady, even when my life is scattered. Sometimes when I rise to leave, she takes my hand in both of hers. Her palms are fragile now, her grip weaker, but the warmth is the same as it always was. She squeezes lightly and says nothing, and yet everything is spoken in that silence. It's her way of telling me she understands, that she never expected perfection, only sincerity. And so I carry both feelings inside me, the ache of guilt and the weight of gratitude. They live side by side, reminding me that love is never perfectly balanced, never perfectly timed. It is messy and flawed and human, but it is real.
There are still moments of joy with her, quiet, luminous, almost hidden from the world, but alive nonetheless. When I visit and settle into the chair across from her, it often feels like slipping into a time capsule. The air in her room is always a little heavy, with the scent of linen dried in the sun, of herbs she insists on hanging near the window, of old wood that has absorbed decades of seasons. She looks at me with those eyes that have watched so many lives unfold, and somehow I feel both young and old in their gaze. We talk, sometimes in fits and starts, sometimes with long silences between us. And yet, those silences are never empty. She fills them with the way her hands smooth the edge of her scarf, the way her lips curve at a memory, the way her head tilts when she listens to me speak. Often, I tell her things I tell no one else. Not secrets, exactly, but small confessions. About the days when I feel tired of running after deadlines, about the quiet fears I rarely name. She listens without judgment, without advice I don't want. Instead, she offers simple truths, spoken so plainly that they feel almost sacred. "You were too hard on yourself," she told me once, her voice thin but steady. "Life will already do enough of that. Don't join in." I laughed then, brushing it off, but her words stayed with me long after I left. They are the kind of words I find myself repeating in my own head on the nights I cannot sleep. There are lighter conversations too, the kind that remind me she has never lost her humor. She tells me stories of when she was young, mischievous tales of sneaking out to meet friends, of dancing barefoot in fields, of laughing until her stomach ached. I picture her then, not the frail woman before me, but a girl my age, quick and daring. It is strange and wonderful, this collision of time, to realize she once stood where I stand now, uncertain and alive in ways I know intimately. Sometimes she laughs so hard at her own memories that she wipes tears from the corners of her eyes. And when she laughs, I laugh too, even if I've heard the story a dozen times before. That laughter feels like a thread stitching us together, sewing past to present in a way that nothing else can. On warmer days, when she has the strength, we step outside into the garden. It isn't as grand as it once was. The rows are smaller, the work now done mostly by others. But she insists on walking slowly among the plants, touching the leaves, naming each one as if it were a beloved child. Dill, parsley, mint. Tomatoes still clinging stubbornly to the vines. She leans on my arm, her grip light but steady, and I feel a strange reversal. Once I leaned on her, now she leans on me. We pause often because she tires easily, but she always waves off my concern. She says, "Let me walk. I'm not done yet." And I know she isn't speaking only of the garden. When we return inside, I make her tea the way she taught me years ago. Not too strong, not too weak. A spoonful of honey stirred in at the end. She sips slowly, savoring it, then nods as though to say, "I've finally done it right." That small approval fills me with a warmth I can't quite explain, as if even now I am still her student, still learning how to carry life with patience. Sometimes, as the day winds down, we look at old photographs together. She points at faces I barely remember or never knew at all, and tells me their stories. That was my brother. That was my neighbor who taught me how to braid hair. That was the woman who helped me during the war. Her voice softens when she speaks of them, and I can see the memories flickering behind her eyes like candlelight. And when she grows tired, when her words slow and her eyelids flutter, I stay a little longer, just watching her breathe, just listening to the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Because even in her weariness, there is peace. She's still here, still herself. And I'm lucky, so lucky to witness it. These moments may not be dramatic, but they matter more than anything else. They are proof that joy is not something we leave behind in youth. It lives on, in quieter ways, in smaller doses, in the steady presence of someone who has already lived so much. And when I sit with her, drinking tea, listening to her stories, and laughing at the same jokes for the 10th time, I feel that joy as clearly as I ever did as a child.
It took me years to notice the ways she lives in me. Not the obvious ones, not the recipes or the needlework or the garden tricks, but the quieter inheritances that slip into your bones when you're not looking. They show up in moments no one else would see. The way I straighten my back before I ring a doorbell, as if meeting the world with dignity were a small promise I must keep. The way I fold towels into thirds so they stack cleanly, corners aligned like a row of tiny rooftops. The way my hands hover for a second over a task and then, without ceremony, begin. Sometimes it's a sentence that escapes my mouth and startles me because I've heard it before in her voice. "Life doesn't stop because you are uncomfortable," I mutter to myself when I'm tempted to quit a run halfway up the hill, and I hear her in the rhythm of my breath. Or, "Put things back where they belong," as I return a screwdriver to its place, not out of neatness, but respect for objects, for effort, for time. I never set out to mimic her, and yet her logic has colonized my small decisions, like a soft law that governs the day. I see her most in the kitchen. I don't bake bread like she did, not with the regularity, not with the quiet authority. But when I do, my hands know moves I never consciously learned. Press, fold, turn, repeat. The dough fights me at first, sticky, stubborn, but then it gives, and there it is, that supple spring that means yes. I wipe flour on my apron, and for a brief breath, the kitchen changes temperature, speaking in her language. Warm yeast, clean soap, the hush of a patient wait. It happens in small rescues, too. I fix a loose button on a winter coat while the kettle sings. I re-thread a drawstring, coaxing the cord through with a safety pin. I rub a little oil into a stiff wooden spoon and watch it drink. None of it is remarkable, but each tiny repair is a refusal to discard, to waste, to pretend but newness is always better. She taught me that care is what keeps things alive. Even outside, in the city's scrappy patches of green, I feel her. I kneel to press a seed into a pot on my windowsill, whispering nothing words the way she once did. Not magic, just attention. Weeks later, a sprout nudges the soil, and I grin alone in my kitchen like a fool. I hear her. Space, air, patience. I water less than I want to, trust more than I think I can. When the plant inevitably leans toward the light, I turn it gently, the way she used to rotate trays on a windowsill so everything got its fair share of sun. She appears in my manners too, not the kind that impress at dinners, but the quiet kind that make ordinary days kinder. I hold doors. I carry a spare handkerchief in my bag, the old-fashioned cloth kind, washed and folded, because she always did. I refuse to speak badly of someone who isn't in the room to defend themselves. I write thank you notes when a text would do. Not to be quaint, but because naming kindness out loud makes it seed further kindness. Sometimes in the middle of a crowded weekday, I catch myself pausing before the worst of my impatience unfurls. The train is late, my inbox is a tide, the person ahead of me forgets their wallet and the line stalls. The old me would have let heat rise in my throat. Now a new habit lands before the flare. A slow breath in, a slow breath out. A quick question. What does this cost you to wait? Most days the answer is less than your peace. I don't always choose the better self, but when I do, I feel her hand on my shoulder, light like a moss, steady as a lesson. There are harder echoes too. On nights when I am tired and the apartment is a quiet ruin, dishes stacked, laundry raining, floors scuffed with the day, I want to give in to neglect. Then I remember the way she treated work, not as punishment, but as a path to pride. I put on a song. I wash the plates until they squeak, lay the damp dishcloth flat to dry instead of wringing it into a knot, sweep the floor in long strokes that end in small, satisfying piles. When I turn off the light, the room looks almost the same to anyone else. To me, it looks like a promise kept. And when life knocks me sideways, the plan collapses, the answer is no, the thing I wanted is not mine, I feel her stubbornness rise. Not the brittle kind that breaks against the world, but the flexible kind that bends and then stands. I make a list. I boil water. I eat something warm. I sleep. I try again in the morning. She taught me this without ever naming it. Recovery as a ritual, endurance as ordinary. Once, a neighbor called late, embarrassed to ask if she knew how to hem curtains. I said a little, which in her grammar means I will try until it works. I brought my tin of needles and a roll of chalk. We spread the fabric across the floor, measured twice, cut once, and stitched in imperfect little ladders that still managed to hold. When we hung them, the room exhaled. My neighbor cried, a strange, tender thing for a window to cause, and I found myself blinking hard too. Not at the curtains, but at the way an old woman's patient lessons could ripple into a new life, unseen and precise. All of this is inheritance. No jewelry, no money, no land. just the choreography of hands and the architecture of attention. I didn't realize as a child, hunched at her table, dropping pins and tearing dough, that I was being given a way to move through the world, to touch things with care, to make small things strong, to meet each day with a kind of sober hope. This will take work, yes, and you can do it. I don't know if I will ever be as steady as she was, but sometimes in the hush before sleep or in the glow of a kitchen light at dusk, I look down and see my fingers resting the way she used to, relaxed but ready. And I think this is how love survives time. It doesn't only live in memory. It lives in gestures that outlast the names we give them.
Autumn always arrives quietly, but with her, I notice it more than ever. My great-grandmother has this way of sensing the shift before anyone else. She'll stand by the window in the early morning, rubbing her palms together to warm them, and murmur, "The air smells different." At first, I laughed when she said it. Air is air, isn't it? But then I stepped outside and felt it myself. The sweetness of summer gone, replaced by something sharper, cleaner, threaded with the faintest trace of wood smoke from chimneys lit for the first time. She was right. As always, she tells me autumn has always been her favorite season. When I asked her why, she only shrugs, her smile small but steady. I think I understand, though. Summer demands too much from her now. Too much heat, too many chores in the garden, too much light pressing down like a weight. Winter can be harsh, long and cold, the kind that seeps into bones no matter how many blankets you pile on. But autumn suits her pace. It is gentler, forgiving. The harvest is already in, jars sealed tight in the cellar, shelves heavy with preserved fruit and pickled vegetables. Autumn whispers, "You've done enough. Rest now." I find myself visiting more often once the days grow shorter. At first, I told myself I was going to help her, to carry groceries, to chop wood, to clean the gutters. But really, I come because I love the way her house feels in autumn. There's always the smell of dried apples and cloves in the curtains. The rugs she lays out creak softly underfoot, carrying the weight of generations. And the kitchen? The kitchen always hums with warmth, pots simmering slowly, releasing steam that fogs the windows and makes the entire room glow. One afternoon, I found her asleep in her chair, head tilted slightly, a knitted shawl draped across her shoulders. The sun streamed through the window, falling across her lap like a quilt of gold. On the table beside her lay an open book, face down, its pages creased from use. I stood there watching her breathe, chest rising, chest falling, steady, peaceful. I thought of the storms she must have lived through, the winters harsher than I'll ever know, the nights filled with sirens, the years of scarcity. And yet here she was, dreaming in the quiet glow of a September afternoon. She woke with a small start, blinking at me before laughing softly. "Old people nap like cats," she said, waving a hand as if embarrassed. But then she reached for my hand, her skin still warm from sleep, and she squeezed it lightly and said, "One day, you'll miss this. These afternoons where nothing happens at all." Her words stayed with me longer than I expected, because she's right. I already feel it even while I'm here. The trick of life is that it convinces us only the extraordinary matters. Big milestones, loud moments, dramatic changes. But sitting there with her, drinking tea in a room that smelled faintly of honey and wood, I understood something different. The extraordinary hides inside the ordinary, waiting for us to notice. A bowl of soup, folded linens, a story told for the 100th time that still makes her eyes shine. Sometimes we sit together in silence, just watching the trees outside. The leaves fall in swirls, red and gold tumbling like they're celebrating rather than dying. She points at them and says, "They know how to leave with grace." I tuck her blanket higher, and she leans against the cushion, content. That small moment, no words, no urgency, feels like a gift. When I leave, the wind usually has picked up, tugging at my coat, scattering leaves and wild confetti. I walk through it with her voice echoing in my chest, her wisdom stitched into me. And I realize that maybe autumn really is the most beautiful season. Not because of its colors alone, but because it teaches us to let go gently, to celebrate endings as beginnings, and to hold closer the people who give warmth to every room they sit in.
There are evenings with her that feel as though time itself pauses to take a breath. The sun begins to sink, spilling its last golden light across the porch, stretching shadows like long fingers over the garden. I sit beside her in the old wooden chair, the same one she has leaned against for decades. The fabric of her shawl has grown thin, the edges frayed, and when it slips from her shoulder, I lift it gently back into place. She smiles at me with that small, knowing expression, as if to say the gesture is unnecessary, yet cherished all the same. We don't speak much during these hours. We don't need to. Silence has become its own language between us, rich with meaning. She hums sometimes, melodies without words, tunes she must have carried from her girlhood. I don't know them, but their rise and fall settles into my bones, soothing me in ways no song on the radio ever could. Her voice is thin now, but it drifts through the dusk like thread through fabric, stitching me into a story older than myself. Every so often, she reaches for my hand. Her skin is fragile now, paper thin, cool to the touch. Her grip no longer carries the strength it once did, but it doesn't need to. Because even without strength, the message is clear. I am here. You are mine. We belong to each other. In that touch, I still feel the steadiness that shaped me, the quiet current of love that needs no force to be true. One evening, as the first leaves skittered across the porch floorboards, she spoke words that I've carried with me ever since. Her eyes were fixed on the trees outside, the branches already edged with fire. She said, "I don't mind that I can't do what I used to. What matters is that you came to sit with me. Do you understand? It's not the doing anymore, it's the being." I wanted to answer, to tell her that I did understand, but my throat closed around the words. Because in that moment, I realized she was still teaching me, as she had all my life, but the lessons had changed. No longer about dough or stitching or gardens. Now she was showing me how to face time itself, how to accept what you lose and hold fiercely to what you still have. I thought about my own life, the endless rush of tasks and deadlines, the constant belief that importance is measured by what I accomplish. Sitting there beside her, I saw how false that belief was. She had done so much. Yes, her life was a quilt of labor and sacrifice. But here, in the fading light, her value wasn't in the work she had once performed. It was in her presence, in her being, in the way she made a porch at sunset feel like the center of the world. She began telling me stories, her voice slow, her memories like leaves drifting one by one to the ground. She spoke of her brother, mischievous and wild, who had carved his initials in the barn and laughed every time she scolded him. She told me about the neighbor who brought her seeds for her first garden, seeds that grew into apple trees still standing today. She told me about holding my mother as a baby, how she sang the same wordless melodies I now hear in the twilight.
Each story was simple, almost ordinary, and yet they landed with weight, like anchors dropped into the sea of my memory. I realized she wasn't just reminiscing, she was giving me pieces of herself, tucking them into my keeping so they would not be lost. As darkness gathered, she grew quiet again. Her breathing slowed, her hands folded in her lap. I stayed beside her, listening to the creak of the rocking chair, the sigh of wind through the trees, the rhythm of her presence. For a while, I didn't want to move, afraid that even the smallest gesture might shatter the fragile magic of the evening. When at last I walked home, the air was cool and fragrant with woodsmoke. Leaves crunched under my shoes, and above me the stars blinked awake. Her words echoed in my chest with every step. It's not the doing, it's the being. And I understood then that perhaps this was her greatest lesson of all, that we are not remembered for the things we build or the tasks we complete, but for the way we make others feel when we simply sit beside them, fully present. The thought that time is both cruel and generous sits with me most when I leave her house after these evenings. Cruel because it bends her body, steals her strength, blurs her vision. Generous because it allows me to witness her still, to sit in her presence and learn lessons I could not have understood as a child. It is a strange balance, one that I grapple with every time I watch her hands tremble as she lifts her cup, or her steps falter as she rises from her chair. I often catch myself memorizing her in fragments, as if I could catalog her entirely. The slope of her shoulders under the shawl, the way her lips press together when she listens, the cadence of her laughter when something truly delights her. I tell myself I am only noticing, but beneath that noticing is a quiet fear that one day these details will live only in memory, and I don't want to lose even one. She, on the other hand, does not seem afraid. She accepts her fragility with the same practicality she once carried into her work. "This is how it goes," she says when I try to fuss over her. "The body slows, the spirit remembers." There is no bitterness in her voice, only clarity. I wonder if that is the true secret of her strength. Not the ability to resist change, but the ability to embrace it without surrendering dignity. When I sit with her, I feel the layers of her life surrounding me. The hardship she endured, the children she raised, the gardens she tended, the meals she cooked, the songs she hummed. All of it lingers in the air, in the walls of her home, in the rhythm of her breath. She has become more than a person to me. She is a living archive, a reminder that every life, no matter how ordinary it may seem, is a tapestry of resilience and tenderness. I sometimes imagine what she must see when she looks at me now. Does she see the clumsy child who tripped over her own feet in the garden? The young woman darting in and out, always promising to stay longer next time? Or does she see a reflection of herself, small pieces carried forward, the straightened back, the patience for detail, the insistence that love is proven in actions, not words? I hope it is the last. I hope she recognizes that even if I fail her in time and presence, I carry her in the way I move through the world. Her lessons are no longer about stitching seams or kneading bread. They are about something greater, about how to endure without growing bitter, how to accept what is lost while cherishing what remains, how to keep love alive even when the body falters. These are not lessons written in books, but etched in her silences, in her gestures, in her way of being. And so, when I sit with her, I try to let go of my guilt.
I remind myself that she doesn't measure my love by the number of visits or the hours I stay. She measures it in my presence, in the way I listen, in the way I let her stories take root inside me. That is enough for her. And if it is enough for her, perhaps it should be enough for me too. The truth is, time will take her body, yes, but time cannot take her from me. She has already given me more than I knew how to ask for. Patience, discipline, resilience, tenderness. She has already planted herself deep within me and within the rest of our family in ways that will outlive her. As I sit there, watching her sip her tea, adjusting the blanket across her knees, I realize that this is what legacy truly is. Not wealth, not possessions, not monuments. Legacy is the way her hands shaped mine, the way her words echo in my choices, the way her presence taught me that being is more important than doing.
When it comes time to leave her house, I always find myself stalling. I gather my things slowly, as if each folded scarf or zipped bag could stretch the minutes just a little longer. I check the pockets of my coat twice, smooth out papers that don't need smoothing, wander back to glance once more at the family photos lined neatly on the shelf. The truth is, I am never really ready to go. No visit ever feels long enough, no conversation complete, no silence fully shared. She never rushes me. She stands patiently, waiting by the door, her hands resting lightly on the frame for balance. Even now, with her body slower, her movements careful, she is the one who carries the rhythm of our partings. She tells me, in her steady voice, the same reminders every time. Button your coat. The air is colder than you think. Don't walk too fast. Watch the road. Eat something warm when you get home. The words might sound ordinary to anyone else, but to me, they are blessings disguised as instructions. I nod, promise to listen, though she knows and I know I will forget half of them. She smiles anyway, forgiving me before I even falter. Before I step out, she always reaches for my hand. Her fingers, thin and lined, curl around mine with less strength than they once had, but the warmth flows just the same. She rarely speaks in those moments. She doesn't need to. Everything is said in the press of her palm. Her pride, her love, her quiet trust that I will carry her with me. That brief touch steadies me in ways I cannot explain. Outside, the air greets me sharply, scented with fallen leaves and the faint smoke of nearby chimneys. I walk down the familiar path slowly, gravel crunching under my shoes. I turn once, always once, to wave. She is still standing in the doorway, framed by the soft golden light spilling from her house. Small, fragile, yet still the center of everything. She raises her hand, and though the movement is slight, it feels monumental. I know she will stay there, watching until I vanish around the bend, just as she did when I was a child. Back then, I thought it was habit. Now I know it is her way of holding me safe for as long as her eyes can reach. The walk home is quieter than I expect. My feet crunch on leaves, and the stars blink awake above me, but inside, I hear her voice, her laughter, the echo of her words. It's not the doing, it's the being. I think of how much of her I already carry. The way I fold laundry neatly into stacks. The way I save scraps to cook something new instead of wasting them. The way I straighten my shoulders before stepping into a room, meeting the world with the dignity she insisted upon. She is not only my great-grandmother. She has become part of my architecture, woven into the person I am without me even realizing it. One day, the house may stand empty, the garden tended by strangers, the chairs by the window holding only dust, but she will not vanish. She will remain in the memory of her touch, in the rhythm of her habits, in the quiet lessons that live in my blood. She will be present in the way I hold the hands of those I love, offering steadiness even when mine trembles. She will be there in the patience I pass on, in the comfort I offer, in the way I find beauty in afternoons that seem too ordinary to matter. This is her eternity, not carved into stone or written in books, but living in us, in me, in my mother, in the invisible threads of care that tie our family together. As I reach my own door, I realize that I am not carrying guilt anymore, not even sorrow. What I carry is gratitude, full and steady, pressing warm against my chest. Gratitude that she is still here, that I can still sit beside her, that her voice and her presence are not yet only memory. And gratitude, too, that even when the day comes when they will not fade. They will remain, bright and enduring, as constant as the love that shaped me from the very beginning.